In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of the most offensive episodes in South Park history. The ones that got banned from entire countries. The ones that triggered real death threats against the creators. The ones that caused a legendary musician to lose his career, got an entire franchise erased from the Chinese internet, and pushed a major television network into a war with its own show. South Park has been on the air since August 13th, 1997. Over 28 seasons, more than 300 episodes. And in that time, creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone have managed to offend just about every religion, every government, every celebrity, and every cultural institution on the planet. But some episodes went further than others. Some episodes crossed lines that even their own network couldn't stomach. And some episodes created consequences that stretched far beyond the television screen and into the real world. We're going to walk through all of them. Let's get started. First up, we've got the episode that turned Eric Cartman from an annoying cartoon bully into one of the most disturbing characters in television history. Season 5, Episode 4. Scott Tenorman Must Die. This episode holds a 9.6 rating on IMDb, making it the single highest rated episode in the entire history of South Park. It aired on July 11, 2001, and what happens in this episode is so dark, so meticulously cruel, that it permanently changed how audiences understood what South Park was capable of. Before this episode, Cartman was a fat kid who said terrible things and got into stupid arguments with Kyle. He was selfish, he was loud, he was a brat. But he was ultimately just a kid, a cartoon child doing cartoon things. Scott Tenorman Must Die changed all of that. After this episode, Cartman was no longer just a bully, he was something else entirely. And what he does in this episode is the reason why. The episode opens with Cartman bragging to Stan, Kyle, and Kenny that he's the first among them to reach puberty. He's incredibly proud of himself. He tells them he's finally gotten his first pubic hair. The other boys are confused until it becomes clear that Cartman didn't actually grow pubic hair. He bought them. He paid $10 to a 9th grader named Scott Tenorman, who sold Cartman a small bag of pubic hair and told him that's how puberty works. Stan and Kyle immediately explained to Cartman that you don't buy pubic hair, you grow your own. That's literally how it works. Cartman realizes he's been scammed. Now, a normal person would just accept the loss and move on. $10 is nothing. Kyle tells Cartman exactly this. Just let it go. Scott is smarter than you. Accept the loss and move on with your life. But Cartman is not a normal person. And the $10 isn't actually the point. The point is that someone made Cartman look stupid, someone outsmarted him, and Cartman cannot allow that to stand. What follows is a series of increasingly desperate and humiliating attempts by Cartman to get his money back from Scott Tenorman. And every single time, Scott stays one step ahead. Cartman tries to trick Scott into giving the money back. Scott sees through it and tricks Cartman into losing an additional $6.12 instead. Cartman tries another scheme. Scott tricks him into traveling all the way to Fort Collins, Colorado to attend something called a pube fair that doesn't exist. Cartman makes the trip. There is no pube fair. He's humiliated again. Kyle keeps telling Cartman to give up. Every plan fails. Every scheme backfires. Scott Tenorman is older, smarter, and better at manipulation than Cartman is. By every measurable standard, Cartman is losing this battle. But he won't stop. He can't stop. His pride won't let him. The situation reaches a breaking point when Scott forces Cartman to perform the most degrading stunt of all. Scott makes Cartman get down on his hands and knees and dance like a pig in front of a group of people. Cartman does it, expecting to finally get his money back. Instead, Scott takes the money, holds it up, and lights it on fire right in front of Cartman's face. The cash burns to nothing. Scott laughs. Cartman watches the money turn to ash. And that's when something changes in Cartman, something fundamental. He doesn't cry, he doesn't throw a tantrum. He just stares at the burning money and then he screams a single promise. He tells Scott Tenorman that he will get his revenge. And from this point forward, Cartman stops being a bratty child and starts being something much, much worse. Cartman's first major revenge plan involves a pony. He goes to a local farmer named Bill Denkins and begins training one of Denkins' ponies to bite at a specific target. He attaches a hot dog to a scarecrow's lower body and trains the pony to attack it. The idea is to lure Scott to the pony and have it bite off a very specific part of his anatomy. This plan is disgusting and juvenile, which is exactly what you'd expect from Cartman. Jimbo and his friend Ned get involved, suggesting that the best way to get revenge is to exploit Scott's weaknesses. They stake out the Tenorman house at night. While watching through the windows, Cartman discovers something important. Scott Tenorman is a huge fan of the band Radiohead. This gives Cartman a new idea. But Jimbo and Ned are distracted. Mrs. Tenorman is apparently visible through a window in a state of undress. They and several other men from the neighborhood are caught peeking by Mr. Tenorman, and they all run away. This scene seems like a throwaway gag. It is not. It becomes important later in a way that nobody sees coming. Cartman hatches a new plan. He records himself doing voice impressions and dubs his voice over footage of the Radiohead members, making it look like the band is telling MTV's Kurt Loder that they hate Scott Tenorman and refuse to go on tour because of him. The plan fails. Scott sees through the fake video immediately, and then Scott escalates the humiliation to a whole new level. He obtains a video of Cartman from one of his earlier failed schemes, a video in which Cartman is on his hands and knees, oinking like a pig. Scott shows this video to the entire town of South Park. Every single person in town sees Cartman acting like a pig. The whole town laughs at him. Even Kenny laughs so hard that he literally dies from it, which in this show is played as a recurring gag. But here it underscores just how badly Cartman has been humiliated. This is the moment. This is the point where Cartman goes from being an annoying kid to being a genuine sociopath. He stops trying to get his $10 back. He stops trying to embarrass Scott. He begins crafting a plan that goes so far beyond anything he's ever done before that Stan and Kyle can only watch in confusion, completely unaware of what's actually happening. Cartman writes a letter to Radiohead. He tells them that a young fan named Scott Tenorman is dying of cancer in a very specific and embarrassing location. He asks if the band would be willing to come to South Park to meet this dying fan. He asks if they're available next Tuesday around 5. Radiohead, apparently moved by the letter, agrees to come. Nobody thinks anything of this. It seems like just another one of Cartman's stupid schemes. Then Cartman invites Scott Tenorman to a chili cook-off. He tells Scott there will be a free pony ride at the event, knowing that Stan and Kyle have already betrayed him. And that's the key. Cartman knows his own friends will betray him. He's counting on it. Stan and Kyle, feeling bad for Scott, warn him about Cartman's pony plan. They tell Scott that Cartman trained Denkin's pony to bite, and that Cartman plans to lure Scott to the pony at the cook-off. Scott now thinks he knows Cartman's entire plan. He thinks he's already won, so Scott decides to humiliate Cartman one final time. He collects pubic hair from kids all over South Park and mixes it into a pot of chili. His plan is to feed this pubic hair chili to Cartman in front of the entire town. The day of the cook-off arrives. Everyone is there. Scott arrives feeling confident. He pushes Cartman to eat his chili, and Cartman plays along, eating a full bowl. Scott can barely contain his excitement. He's about to reveal to the entire town what Cartman just ate. He starts laughing. He tells Cartman about the pubic hair. He waits for the reaction, but there is no reaction, at least not the one Scott expected. Cartman smiles, and then he starts talking. And what comes out of his mouth over the next 2 minutes is the most elaborate, horrifying revenge monologue in the history of animated television. Cartman explains that he knew about the pubic hair chili the entire time. He switched the bowls before Scott arrived. The chili Cartman ate was Chef's chili. Chef brought his own pot, and Cartman simply swapped them. The chili with the pubic hair went to nobody. But that was just the beginning. Cartman tells Scott that he anticipated everything. He knew Stan and Kyle would betray him. He knew they would warn Scott about the pony plan. And he knew that because Scott believed the pony was the entire scheme, Scott would try to sabotage it. But Cartman also knew something else. He knew Scott wouldn't go to Denkin's ranch himself because he'd be afraid of the pony. He'd send someone else instead. And who would Scott send to deal with an abandoned pony at a ranch? His parents. Cartman explains that what Stan and Kyle didn't tell Scott was that Farmer Denkins shoots trespassers on sight. And Cartman made sure Denkins was on particularly high alert that night by warning him about violent pony killers in the area. So when Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman showed up at Denkin's ranch to check on the pony, Denkins saw trespassers on his property. And he shot them both dead. The entire town turns to look at Farmer Denkins, who's standing right there. He quickly defends himself. They were trespassing. He was protecting his property. It was self-defense. But Cartman isn't done. He tells Scott that he arrived at the scene just in time to see Denkins giving his police report to Officer Barbrady. And he waited, and then he stole the bodies. Cartman tells Scott that he spent the entire night with a hacksaw. He dismembered both of Scott's parents. And then he cooked them into chili, the chili that Scott Tenorman just ate, the chili in Scott's pot. Cartman looks at Scott and asks if he likes his chili. He tells him it's a special recipe. He calls it Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman chili. Scott's face goes white. He reaches into the bowl of chili and pulls out a human finger, his mother's finger, with a diamond ring still on it. Scott vomits. Then he begins sobbing uncontrollably, crumpled on the ground, mourning the parents he just unknowingly ate. Cartman climbs up on the table and begins singing. He chants, "Nya, nya, 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 nya. I made you eat your parents. Nya, 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 nya," over and over while dancing on the table above Scott's broken body. And then, right on cue, exactly on Cartman's schedule, Radiohead arrives. The band walks up and sees Scott Tenorman crying on the ground. They don't know what happened. They just see a teenager weeping in public. And they call him a crybaby. They say he's totally not cool. They express disgust and walk away, leaving Scott Tenorman in complete and total despair. Cartman climbs down from the table, walks over to Scott, and licks the tears directly off his face. He calls them yummy and sweet. He names them the tears of unfathomable sadness. Stan and Kyle stand in the crowd, watching the entire thing unfold. They are absolutely horrified. Kyle turns to Stan and says, very quietly, that they should probably never make Cartman angry again. Stan immediately agrees. Cartman appears in a Looney Tunes-style circle and says, "That's all, folks." The episode ends. The reason this episode is considered the most offensive, the most disturbing, and simultaneously the greatest episode in South Park history is not because of the violence itself, it's because of the precision. Cartman didn't just lash out in anger. He didn't just hurt someone in a fit of rage. He spent days, possibly weeks, constructing a scheme that involved manipulating his own friends, engineering the death of 2 innocent people, committing acts that would constitute multiple felonies in the real world, cooking human remains into food, and serving it to a grieving teenager while his favorite band called him pathetic. And the show plays it as a comedy. That's what made this episode a cultural earthquake. There was no moral lesson. There was no "I learned something today" speech at the end. Kyle doesn't explain what they all took away from the experience. The episode ends with Cartman victorious. He won, he got his revenge, and it cost 2 people their lives, destroyed a teenager's sanity, and revealed that the chubby 8-year-old in the red jacket was capable of something that most serial killers would consider excessive. The episode aired during South Park's 5th season, which many fans consider part of the show's golden age. It was written by Trey Parker and holds the highest IMDb rating of any episode in the series. It defined Cartman as a character permanently. Every dark, manipulative, psychopathic thing Cartman does in future seasons traces directly back to this episode. This is the one that proved he wasn't just a brat, he was something genuinely terrifying. And there's one more detail that makes this even darker. It doesn't get revealed until years later in the season 14 episodes titled 200 and 201, which we'll cover later in this video. In those episodes, Scott Tenorman returns. He's been in a mental institution. He's spent years researching Cartman's background, and he discovers something that Cartman himself didn't know. Scott's father, Mr. Tenorman, was a member of the Denver Broncos football team, and he had an affair with Cartman's mother, which means Mr. Tenorman was Cartman's biological father, which means Scott and Cartman are half-brothers, which means Cartman unknowingly orchestrated the death of his own father, cooked him into chili, and fed him to his own half-brother. The episode that revealed this information was itself banned from television for entirely different reasons, which we'll get to. But the Scott Tenorman connection adds a layer of tragedy to an already pitch-black story. Cartman killed his own dad and didn't even know it. And when he found out years later, his only reaction was being upset that he was technically half ginger, because the Tenormans had red hair. That's Cartman. That's who this character is. And it all started with $10 and a bag of pubic hair. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the episode that set a television record that still hasn't been broken. Season 5, Episode 1, It Hits the Fan. In this episode, the word shit is spoken uncensored 162 times. That averages out to roughly once every 8 seconds for the entire runtime. When this episode aired on June 20th, 2001, it was the first time Comedy Central had ever allowed fully uncensored profanity to broadcast on their network. And the story of how this happened is almost as ridiculous as the episode itself. Before we get into the plot, you need to understand what was happening on television in the early 2000s. There was a growing trend in prestige drama where shows on cable and network television were starting to push boundaries with language. The show NYPD Blue had been making waves for years by including content that was considered edgy for broadcast standards. And when dramas did it, critics called it bold and artistic. When comedies tried the same thing, they were called vulgar and irresponsible. Trey Parker and Matt Stone were furious about this double standard. They felt that if a drama could get praised for pushing boundaries, a comedy should be allowed to do the same thing. So they went to Comedy Central with an idea. They wanted to do an episode where the word shit was said uncensored. Just a few times, nothing crazy. Comedy Central immediately said no. Absolutely not. They would never allow it. And this is where Parker and Stone did something brilliant. Instead of fighting for a few uses of the word, they came back with a completely different pitch. They told the network they wanted to say the word roughly 200 times in a single episode. They argued that by saying it so many times, the word would become completely meaningless. It would lose all of its shock value. It would actually prove the point that profanity is only powerful, because we treat it as powerful. If you say it enough, it just becomes noise. According to DVD commentary from the show, the executives at Comedy Central thought about it and somehow agreed. They felt the profanity was justified by the satirical context of the episode. This decision shocked even Parker and Stone, who later admitted they didn't actually think the network would approve it. The episode opens with the boys standing at the bus stop. Kyle tells Stan and Kenny that he has tickets to go see The Lion King on stage. Nobody cares. Cartman shows up with much bigger news. He announces that the ABC television network is going to say the word shit uncensored on their crime show called Cop Drama that night. The entire town of South Park goes absolutely insane with excitement. Everyone rushes home to watch. Kyle is the only person who thinks the marketing stunt is stupid. He tries to get anyone to go see The Lion King with him instead. Nobody will. Even Butters turns him down. His parents want to watch Cop Drama with him so he doesn't take the word the wrong way. That night, the whole town watches the show. When the word is finally spoken on Cop Drama, the town erupts. And then everyone starts saying it, constantly, every conversation, every interaction, every sentence now includes the word shit as casually as breathing. The word spreads through South Park like a virus. At school, Mr. Garrison teaches his kindergarten class not just about the word shit, but also about the word fag. He explains that he's allowed to say that word uncensored because he's gay. To demonstrate, he says it in the local bar, and it airs without a bleep. But when a straight man at the bar tries to say the same word, it gets bleeped. The implication is that only certain people have permission to use certain words. There's one exception. Jimbo also says the word uncensored without getting bleeped, which quietly implies something about Jimbo that nobody in the bar expected. Mr. Garrison notices this immediately and asks Jimbo if he wants to make out. Meanwhile, Cartman starts getting bored with the word shit because everyone is saying it. It's lost its power. He moves on to other words, including the Thai dish name mee krab, which he declares sounds even more offensive than any actual profanity. But here's where the episode takes a wild turn. The boys visit Chef at the library and discover that the word shit isn't just a regular swear word. It's a literal curse word, as in an ancient magical curse. Its overuse throughout history has caused plagues and supernatural disasters. The episode reveals that every time shit is said excessively in a society, the Black Death returns. People in South Park start getting sick. They begin vomiting up their own intestines. A mysterious plague sweeps through the town. The sickness is directly linked to how many times the word is spoken. The boys and Chef try to stop the HBC network from making things worse. The network has planned a special live broadcast event called Must Shit TV. where episodes of existing shows will be performed live with the word shit replacing almost every other word of dialogue. The boys travel to Hollywood to convince the network executives to cancel the broadcast. They arrive at the HBC headquarters and try to reason with the executives, but nobody will listen. Then the Knights of Standards and Practices show up. These are ancient warriors, like something out of a King Arthur story, who exist specifically to enforce the rules of language. They're the mystical guardians of profanity. They've been dormant for centuries, but the excessive use of the curse word has reawakened them. They storm the studio to stop the broadcast by force. One of the network executives says the word shit repeatedly in a fit of anger. This triggers the final catastrophe. A massive dragon named Geldon, an ancient beast connected to the curse, rises from the earth. The dragon begins destroying the studio, killing people in the audience, and generally causing havoc. Kyle saves the day. He uses a magical runestone that belongs to the Knights of Standards and Practices and destroys the dragon with it. The plague ends, the curse is broken, the world goes back to normal. Cartman delivers the moral of the story to the crowd. He tells everyone they need to watch their language, not because swearing is inherently bad, but because saying it too much makes it meaningless. The power of a word comes from using it sparingly. When everyone says it all the time, it loses all impact and just becomes noise. Kyle and Stan agree. They acknowledge that swearing can be fun, but doing it constantly causes problems. The lesson is that the taboo nature of profanity is what gives it power, and destroying the taboo doesn't liberate anyone, it just makes language boring. Then Kenny, who has been sick throughout the episode, vomits up his intestines and dies. Stan almost says, "Holy shit," in response, but catches himself and says, "Holy poo," instead. Cartman smiles and tells his friends he loves them. The episode ends. Now here's what makes this episode important beyond the obvious shock value. Parker and Stone were making a legitimate argument about censorship. They were pointing out the hypocrisy of how television networks treated profanity differently depending on whether it appeared in a drama or a comedy. When NYPD Blue or similar shows used harsh language, critics praised the writing as brave and realistic. When South Park did the same thing, critics called it juvenile and unnecessary. Parker and Stone argued this was absurd. A word is a word regardless of the genre it appears in. The rules should be the same for everyone. The episode also made a point about cultural desensitization. By having the town of South Park become obsessed with the word and then immediately bored by it, the episode demonstrated that prohibiting something gives it power, and flooding the market with it takes that power away. The 162 uses of shit in 22 minutes proved the thesis in real time. By the end of the episode, viewers didn't even notice the word anymore. It had become background noise, which was exactly the point. What happened after the episode aired was perhaps the most ironic outcome possible. Despite being specifically designed to cause controversy, despite setting a record for profanity on cable television, despite featuring an on-screen counter tracking every single use of the word, the episode generated almost no backlash. Nobody complained. The Parents Television Council, which had gone after South Park many times before, barely responded. Watchdog groups mostly shrugged. Matt Stone explained the lack of controversy by citing changing cultural standards. He said, and this is a direct paraphrase of what he told reporters, nobody cares anymore. The standards are almost gone. Nobody gives a shit or a bullshit. He was amused that the one episode specifically built to provoke outrage was the one that provoked the least. The episode was later listed as number 8 on the 10 South Parks That Changed the World list. It was the first episode of the show's 5th season, which many fans consider the beginning of South Park's golden age. It was also the first episode animated using Maya software instead of the Power Animator system the show had used previously, meaning the episode literally looked different from everything that came before it. The colors were softer, the animation was smoother, it was a new era for the show in every possible way. When the episode originally premiered, there was no counter on screen tracking the profanity. The counter, which has become iconic, was added for all subsequent airings and home video releases. It's usually referred to by fans as the shit-o-meter. On reruns and DVD versions, the counter appears in the bottom left corner of the screen, ticking upward every time the word is spoken. An interesting detail about the counter is that there's actually a discrepancy. During one sequence where a network executive repeats the word rapidly, The counter ticks up between breaths, counting pauses as separate utterances. Some fans have argued that the actual spoken count is technically 161, not 162. But the official number has always been listed as 162, and that's the number that entered the record books. The episode is currently available on Paramount Plus and can be streamed in its original uncensored form. It has never been edited or censored for reruns. Comedy Central's decision to allow it to air uncensored has stood for over 2 decades. Later episodes of South Park would also use the word shit, uncensored in specific contexts, but none have ever come close to the record set by It Hits the Fan. The episode remains one of the most unique experiments in the history of cable television, a show deliberately trying to break a boundary that turned out to already be broken. The word had lost its power long before the episode aired. South Park just proved it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the episode that started a real-world war between South Park and one of the most powerful organizations in America. Season 9, Episode 12, Trapped in the Closet. This episode aired on November 16, 2005. It was written and directed by Trey Parker, who credited himself under the fake name John Smith. And what this episode set into motion would ultimately cost a beloved musician his career, generate threats from one of Hollywood's biggest movie stars, and prove that some organizations can dish out mockery but absolutely cannot take it. To understand why this episode caused so much damage, you need to know a few things about the Church of Scientology. Founded in 1954 by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology is one of the most controversial religious organizations in the world. Its members include some of the most famous people in entertainment, including Tom Cruise and John Travolta. The church is notoriously litigious, meaning they sue people who criticize them, a lot. They have an entire department dedicated to silencing critics. For decades, mainstream entertainment largely avoided mocking Scientology directly because nobody wanted to deal with the legal consequences. Trey Parker and Matt Stone didn't care about any of that. The episode begins with Stan Marsh looking for something fun and free to do after school. He comes across a Scientology recruitment center. They offer him a free personality test, which is actually how the real Church of Scientology recruits new members. Stan takes the test, and the results come back showing that his thetan levels are extraordinarily high. Thetan levels are a concept within Scientology that measure a person's spiritual state. In the show, Stan's levels are so high that the church leaders become convinced he is the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard himself, the founder of the religion. Stan is confused by all of this. He doesn't know what Scientology is. He doesn't understand why everyone is suddenly treating him like a prophet. But the church members are thrilled. They begin worshiping Stan and bringing him gifts. Word spreads through the Scientology community that L. Ron Hubbard has returned in the body of a 9-year-old boy from Colorado. This news reaches Tom Cruise, who is depicted in the episode as a devoted Scientologist. Cruise comes to South Park to meet Stan, hoping to receive validation from the reincarnation of his spiritual leader. When he arrives, he asks Stan what he thinks of his acting. Stan, being a 9-year-old who doesn't care about any of this, tells Cruise that his acting is okay but not as good as some other actors. Cruise is devastated by this mild criticism. He walks into Stan's closet and refuses to come out. This is the central joke of the episode. Tom Cruise is literally in the closet. The double meaning is obvious and sustained for the entire runtime. Various characters come to Stan's house and try to convince Cruise to come out of the closet. They say, "Tom Cruise, come out of the closet," over and over. At one point, singer R. Kelly shows up and also ends up in the closet, creating an extended riff on his famous song, Trapped in the Closet. John Travolta eventually arrives to help and also goes into the closet. The scene becomes increasingly absurd as more and more people end up trapped in Stan's closet, while everyone outside keeps asking them to please just come out. Meanwhile, the episode takes a sharp turn into territory that had never been explored on television before. Stan asks the Scientology leaders to explain what Scientologists actually believe. They launch into the church's creation myth, and the show animates it in full. The animation depicts an alien dictator named Xenu, who, 75 million years ago, brought billions of aliens to Earth, stacked them around volcanoes, and blew them up with hydrogen bombs. The souls of these dead aliens, called Thetans, then attach themselves to living humans and cause all of humanity's problems. This is presented as the actual cosmology of Scientology, the story that members learn after years of involvement and hundreds of thousands of dollars in courses. During this entire sequence, text appears at the bottom of the screen that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." The text stays on screen throughout the explanation. Parker and Stone weren't making this up. They were presenting the actual theology of Scientology as documented by former members and investigative journalists. The text was their way of emphasizing that they weren't exaggerating for comedy. This was real. The episode ends with Stan standing outside his house, addressing the Scientology leaders. He tells them that their religion seems like it might just be a big scam designed to take people's money. The Scientology president threatens to sue Stan. Everyone threatens to sue everyone. The camera pulls back to reveal a crowd of people all shouting, "I'll sue you," at each other. The final shot shows the credits rolling with every name listed as John Smith or Jane Smith, a joke about the creators hiding their identities to avoid Scientology's lawyers. The episode aired and immediately became one of the most talked about episodes in the show's history. It received critical acclaim. It was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. But the real story was what happened behind the scenes. The Church of Scientology did not take the episode well. On November 17th, 2005, the day after the episode aired, a high-ranking Scientology executive named Mike Rinder wrote a memo to the church's leader, David Miscavige, about how to respond. According to documents that later surfaced when Rinder left the organization, the church initially considered filing a lawsuit against Parker and Stone. They ultimately decided against it because they knew their legal case was weak. You can't sue someone for accurately describing your own beliefs. But the church didn't just let it go. They couldn't. The episode had aired the creation story that they normally only shared with members who had spent years and enormous amounts of money progressing through Scientology's levels. Having it broadcast on basic cable, animated with construction paper characters and narrated by a 9-year-old, was humiliating for the organization. The first real casualty was the rebroadcast. The episode was scheduled to air again on March 15, 2006. But on that date, Comedy Central pulled the episode without warning and replaced it with a completely different South Park episode. The network's official explanation was that the schedule change was meant as a tribute to Isaac Hayes, who had just announced his departure from the show 2 days earlier. But other reports painted a very different picture. According to reports from Fox News, the entertainment blog HollywoodInterrupted.com, and E! News, the real reason the rebroadcast was canceled was Tom Cruise. Specifically, the reports claimed that Cruise threatened to boycott the promotional tour for his upcoming film, Mission: Impossible 3. If Viacom, which owns both Comedy Central and Paramount Pictures, didn't pull the episode. Viacom had a lot of money invested in Mission: Impossible 3. Comedy Central was part of Viacom. The math was simple. Pull a rerun of a cartoon or risk losing the marketing push for a major summer blockbuster. The cartoon lost. Parker and Stone were reportedly told not to comment on the situation publicly to avoid embarrassing Cruise. Instead, they issued a statement through their lawyer. The statement was deadpan and absurd, which is exactly what you'd expect from them. It was signed Trey Parker and Matt Stone, servants of the Dark Lord Xenu. This was a deliberate reference to the Scientology creation myth they had just exposed on television. The Los Angeles Times dubbed the entire saga ClosetGate. The independent newspaper noted that the controversy actually generated positive publicity for Parker and Stone, writing that ClosetGate would be the gift that keeps on giving. But the biggest and most painful consequence of the episode involved Isaac Hayes. Hayes was the legendary musician behind the iconic song Shaft. He had voiced the character of Chef on South Park since the show's very first season in 1997. Chef was one of the most beloved characters on the show. He was the school cafeteria worker who served as a mentor to the boys, often giving them advice in the form of soul music. Hayes brought genuine warmth and musical talent to the role. He was a critical part of the show's identity. Isaac Hayes was also a devoted Scientologist, and in early 2006, a statement was released in his name announcing that he was leaving South Park. The statement accused the show of intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs. It read, in part, that there is a place in this world for satire, but there is a time when satire ends and intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs of others begins. Matt Stone's response was immediate and pointed. He publicly stated that Hayes had never had a problem with the show making fun of Christians, Muslims, Mormons, and Jews over the course of 10 years and over 150 episodes. He said Hayes only developed a sudden case of religious sensitivity when it was his religion being featured. Stone called this the beginning of intolerance and bigotry. He said they would release Hayes from his contract and wished him well. That was the public narrative for years. Isaac Hayes quit South Park because he was offended by the Scientology episode. Case closed, except it wasn't true. In 2016, The Hollywood Reporter published a major oral history of South Park celebrating the show's 20th anniversary. In that piece, Isaac Hayes' son, Isaac Hayes III, set the record straight. He said his father did not quit South Park. Scientology quit South Park for him. According to Hayes III, his father suffered a major stroke in January 2006, just a few months after Trapped in the Closet aired. The stroke was severe. Hayes lost the ability to speak. He couldn't sign his own name. He had to relearn basic motor functions, including how to play the piano. He was in no condition to make career decisions. At the time, everyone around Isaac Hayes was a Scientologist. His assistants, his management, his publicists. They were all members of the church. Hayes III stated that someone within that circle, someone they have never been able to identify, made the decision to quit South Park on his father's behalf. The resignation statement was written by someone else. Isaac Hayes never wrote those words. He never made that choice. Hayes III put it bluntly. He said his father was not that big of a hypocrite. He wouldn't have been part of a show that constantly mocked African American people, Jewish people, and gay people only to quit when it was Scientology's turn. He said his father loved the show. He loved Matt and Trey. He loved voicing Chef. And he was making a lot of money doing it. He would never have left voluntarily. Matt Stone later confirmed this version of events. He said that when he spoke with Hayes shortly after the episode aired, it was pretty obvious that someone had sent Hayes to ask them to pull the episode. Stone said they had kept Hayes out of the loop about the Scientology episode precisely so he would have plausible deniability. They didn't want him to be held accountable for something the show did. In a 2025 interview with the outlet Cracked, Hayes III provided even more detail. He said that the Scientologists around his father pushed him back into a grueling touring schedule shortly after his stroke before he was physically ready. Hayes III believes this contributed to his father's declining health. Isaac Hayes died on August 10, 2008, at the age of 65 from a second stroke. Parker and Stone's response to losing Hayes came in the very next episode they produced. Season 10, Episode 1, The Return of Chef. In this episode, Chef returns to South Park after being away with a mysterious organization called the Super Adventure Club. The show made it clear that this was a stand-in for Scientology. Chef's dialogue in the episode was created by splicing together old recordings of Isaac Hayes from previous episodes, making Chef sound disjointed and brainwashed. Throughout the episode, Chef says increasingly bizarre and inappropriate things to the children, things he would never have said before. The boys realize that Chef has been corrupted by the organization. They try to save him. They fail. At the end of the episode, Chef dies in one of the most spectacularly violent deaths the show has ever depicted. He falls off a bridge, catches fire, gets struck by lightning, is attacked by a mountain lion, is mauled by a grizzly bear, and is impaled on a tree branch. His body is torn apart while the boys watch in horror. After the death, Kyle delivers a speech that was clearly directed at the real-world situation with Isaac Hayes. Kyle tells the other boys that they shouldn't be angry at Chef. Chef was their friend for years. He was always there for them. The person who was saying crazy things at the end, that wasn't the real Chef. That was the crazy, fruity little club that scrambled his brain. Kyle says they should remember Chef for who he was, not for what he became at the end. It was an extraordinarily emotional moment for a show known primarily for crude humor. Parker and Stone were essentially eulogizing their friend Isaac Hayes while simultaneously condemning the organization they believed had taken him away from them. Parker and Stone later dedicated the season 12 episode The China Program to Isaac Hayes' memory after his death. The episode was their way of acknowledging that despite everything that happened, they still cared about the man who had been part of their show for nearly a decade. The Scientology saga remains one of the defining conflicts in South Park's history. It demonstrated that the show's willingness to mock powerful institutions had real-world consequences. It cost them a cast member. It generated genuine corporate pressure from one of Hollywood's biggest movie stars. It put them in the crosshairs of an organization known for aggressive retaliation against its critics. And they didn't back down. Trapped in the Closet is still available to stream on Paramount+. The church never succeeded in getting it permanently removed. The episode earned an Emmy nomination in 2006, validating the creator's approach. And the revelation about Isaac Hayes, that he didn't quit but was forced out by the people around him, has recontextualized the entire story as something genuinely tragic rather than simply controversial. Isaac Hayes loved South Park. He loved voicing Chef. He loved Trey Parker and Matt Stone, and he never got to tell them that himself because a stroke took his voice and the people around him made decisions he couldn't control. His son has made sure the world knows the truth. And that truth, more than anything in the episode itself, is the real story of Trapped in the Closet. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the episodes that are, without question, the most dangerous thing South Park has ever done. Not the most offensive, not the most shocking, the most dangerous. Because these episodes didn't just cause controversy. They caused real death threats against real people, forced the New York City Police Department to increase security at a major media company's headquarters, and resulted in the only South Park episodes that have been permanently banned from every official platform on the planet. Season 14, Episode 5, and Episode 6. The episodes are simply titled 200 and 201. They aired on April 14th and April 21st, 2010. And as of right now, in 2026, you cannot watch them legally anywhere. Not on Paramount+, not on the official South Park Studios website, not on any streaming service, not on any DVD box set released in recent years. They have been scrubbed from existence by Comedy Central, and they are never coming back. To understand why these episodes were made and why they were banned, you need to understand what happened in the years leading up to them. And that story starts with a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad published in a Danish newspaper. In September 2005, the Danish newspaper Jyllands Posten published 12 editorial cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. In mainstream Islam, any visual depiction of Muhammad is considered deeply offensive and is forbidden by many interpretations of Islamic law. The publication of these cartoons triggered a global crisis. There were massive protests across the Muslim world. Danish embassies were attacked. Boycotts of Danish products were organized. At least 200 people died in violence connected to the controversy. The crisis dominated international news for months. South Park had actually depicted Muhammad years earlier without any problems at all. In the Season 5 episode Super Best Friends, which aired on July 4th, 2001, Muhammad appeared as a member of a superhero team alongside Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Moses, and other religious figures. He was shown using fire powers and was treated like any other character in the episode. Nobody complained, nobody noticed, nobody cared. But after the Danish cartoon controversy, everything changed. Any depiction of Muhammad in Western media became a potential flashpoint for violence. Comedy Central, which had never had an issue with Muhammad appearing on South Park before, suddenly became extremely cautious. In Season 10, Parker and Stone created a two-part episode called Cartoon Wars, which aired in April 2006. The episode directly addressed the controversy. In the story, the animated show Family Guy is planning to show Muhammad in an upcoming episode. The fictional town of South Park panics. Characters debate whether the show should be allowed to air the image. Cartman, who hates Family Guy, tries to get the episode pulled, while Kyle argues for free speech. The climax of Cartoon Wars Part 2 was supposed to include an image of Muhammad. Comedy Central refused to air it. They inserted a black screen with text stating that Comedy Central had refused to broadcast the image. Parker and Stone were reportedly furious. They pointed out the hypocrisy of a network that had no problem airing episodes mocking Christianity, Judaism, Mormonism, Hinduism, and every other religion on earth, but drew the line at showing Muhammad because of the threat of violence. The network was making exactly the argument the episode was criticizing. They were proving South Park's point for them. For 4 years, Parker and Stone stewed over this. They felt they had been silenced by corporate cowardice. And when the show's 200th episode approached in April 2010, they decided to make their statement. They would create the most ambitious, most confrontational, most deliberately provocative episodes in the show's history. Episode 200 opens with a massive celebration in the town of South Park, but the celebration is quickly interrupted. Tom Cruise, who's been mocked by the citizens of South Park in previous episodes, has assembled every single celebrity the show has ever made fun of. Rob Reiner, Steven Spielberg, Kanye West, Paris Hilton, Mel Gibson, George Lucas, Barbra Streisand, dozens of famous people, all furious about how South Park has treated them over the years. They file a class action lawsuit against the town. The lawsuit will bankrupt the entire town unless the citizens can meet one condition. Tom Cruise will drop the case if the town can bring him the Prophet Muhammad. Cruise doesn't care about Muhammad as a religious figure. He cares about Muhammad's supposed supernatural power to never be mocked or ridiculed. In the logic of the show, Muhammad possesses an ability that makes it impossible for anyone to make fun of him, because the real world treats any depiction of him as untouchable. Cruise wants that power for himself. He's tired of being mocked, and he wants to become unmockable. The town panics. They know that showing Muhammad will cause an international incident. But they also know that the lawsuit will destroy them. They attempt various schemes to bring Muhammad to the celebrities without actually showing him. At one point, they put Muhammad in a bear mascot costume so that his physical appearance is hidden. This becomes a plot point. Meanwhile, a separate storyline involves Cartman learning that the true identity of his father might not be what he's always been told. In a previous Season 2 episode, the show had revealed that Cartman's mother, Layane, was actually a hermaphrodite and was technically Cartman's father. But the events of episode 200 suggest this was a lie. Someone covered up the real identity of Cartman's father. Mr. Garrison's old puppet, Mr. Hat, admits to Cartman that there was indeed a cover-up. Episode 200 ends on a cliffhanger. A group of red-haired ginger kids has surrounded the town, threatening to blow it up if Muhammad isn't revealed. Mecha Streisand, a giant robotic version of Barbra Streisand from a much earlier episode, is attacking the town. The citizens are about to show Muhammad, and Mr. Hat is about to reveal who Cartman's real father is. Everything is unresolved. The episode aired on April 14, 2010. The response was immediate and terrifying. Within days, a website belonging to a New York-based radical Muslim organization called Revolution Muslim posted an entry about the episode. The post included a statement warning Trey Parker and Matt Stone that they will probably wind up like Theo van Gogh. Theo van Gogh was a Dutch filmmaker who was murdered on November 2, 2004, in broad daylight on an Amsterdam street by a man named Mohamed Bouyeri. Van Gogh was killed because he had made a short film about violence against women in certain Islamic societies. He was shot multiple times, had his throat cut, and had a letter pinned to his body with a knife. The Revolution Muslim post included the addresses of Comedy Central's headquarters in New York City and South Park Studios' production offices in Los Angeles. The author of the post, a man named Zachary Adam Chesser, later claimed the post was meant as a warning rather than a threat. He said providing the addresses was meant to give people the opportunity to protest peacefully. Law enforcement did not interpret it that way. The NYPD increased security at Comedy Central's New York headquarters in direct response to the posting. The FBI investigated. Law enforcement officials said that while Revolution Muslim itself was considered all talk and had no history of actual violence, the concern was that the website post could inspire other, more dangerous individuals to act on the implicit threat. Trey Parker and Matt Stone refused to back down. They had already written episode 201. They had already animated it. They were going to air it. Episode 201 aired on April 21, 2010, 1 week after episode 200. But it didn't air the way Parker and Stone intended. Comedy Central, acting on its own authority and against the explicit wishes of the creators, made sweeping changes to the episode before it was broadcast. Every single mention of Muhammad's name was replaced with an audio bleep. Not just a few mentions, every single one. His image, which was already hidden behind a black censored bar in the previous episode, remained obscured. But the most devastating change was to the ending. The episode's climax features Kyle giving one of the show's trademark "I learned something today" speeches. This is the moment in every South Park episode where a character summarizes the moral lesson. In episode 201, Kyle's speech was specifically about censorship and the use of violence to silence free speech. After Kyle speaks, Jesus Christ and Santa Claus also give short speeches on the same topic. The entire moral conclusion of the episode, all 3 speeches lasting nearly 2 minutes of screen time, was replaced with a single continuous audio bleep. The viewer heard nothing, just a solid, unbroken tone for 2 minutes. The entire point of the 2-part episode was silenced by the very network that commissioned it. The irony was staggering. Parker and Stone had created an episode about how threats of violence are used to censor free speech, and their own network censored the episode because of threats of violence. The episode's thesis was proven correct by the act of censoring it. Parker and Stone immediately posted a statement on the South Park Studios website. They confirmed that they did not censor the episode. Comedy Central did. The statement made clear that the bleeping and additional censorship were inserted by the network without the creator's approval. According to a 2016 oral history in The Hollywood Reporter, Trey Parker was so angry about the censorship that he purchased a plane ticket to South Africa and showed it to the head of Comedy Central. The gesture was a reference to Dave Chappelle, who had famously fled to South Africa when he walked away from his Comedy Central show. Parker was essentially threatening to leave. He never actually went, but the point was made. The Guardian later reported that a Comedy Central spokesperson confirmed the network's role in the censorship, stating that they couldn't go into the thinking behind it, but confirmed it was Comedy Central that inserted the bleeps and not South Park. In January 2014, nearly 4 years after the episodes aired, the uncensored version of 201 was discovered and leaked online. A user on the internet forum 4chan realized that the original uncensored file for episode 201 was still sitting on the South Park Studios web server. It had never been deleted, it was just hidden. Using a tool called RTMP-dump, the user downloaded the file and distributed it publicly. This was the first time anyone outside of Comedy Central's offices had heard the unbleeped speeches. The leaked speech revealed exactly what Comedy Central had been hiding. Kyle's speech argued sarcastically that the only true power in the world is threatening people with violence. He said that throughout the whole ordeal, everyone had wanted to show things they weren't allowed to show, but it wasn't because of any magic power. It was because of the magical power of threatening people with violence. Jesus followed up by telling the Ginger Kids that if they didn't want to be made fun of anymore, all they needed were guns and bombs. Santa Claus added that all anyone needs to do is instill fear and be willing to hurt people, and they can get whatever they want. The speech was pure, concentrated sarcasm. It was South Park's way of saying that censorship through intimidation works, and that the world should be ashamed that it works. The message was aimed directly at Comedy Central, at Revolution Muslim, at anyone who had used the threat of violence to silence criticism. And it had been silenced by the exact same tactic it was criticizing. Beyond the Muhammad storyline, episode 201 also contained the resolution to the Cartman's father subplot. Scott Tenorman, the teenager Cartman had tricked into eating his own parents back in season 5, returned. Scott had spent years in a mental institution, researching Cartman's background. He discovered the truth that the town of South Park had been hiding. Cartman's mother had an affair with a Denver Broncos football player. That player was Scott's father, Jack Tenorman, which meant Jack Tenorman was also Cartman's biological father. This revelation meant that Cartman, without knowing it, had arranged the death of his own father. And then he cooked his own father into chili, and then he fed his own father to his half-brother. When Cartman hears this information, his reaction is not grief over learning he killed his own father. His reaction is distress over learning that he is half ginger because the Tenorman family had red hair. Another character cheers him up by pointing out that he's also half Denver Bronco, which Cartman finds comforting. The aftermath of episodes 200 and 201 was severe and lasting. Comedy Central pulled both episodes from reruns immediately. They removed them from the official South Park Studios website. They excluded them from syndication contracts. When the 14th season DVD was released on April 26, 2011, it included episode 201, but only in its censored form. A text card appeared before the episode stating that it was being presented as it originally aired, complete with Comedy Central's bleeps. But the damage went further than just these 2 episodes. In the wake of the controversy, Comedy Central also went back and retroactively pulled Super Best Friends from Season 5, the episode where Muhammad had appeared uncensored back in 2001 without any controversy. They pulled it purely because it contained an image of Muhammad that, in the current climate, they were no longer willing to broadcast. The Cartoon Wars episodes from Season 10 were also removed from streaming bundles, though they remained available in some formats. In total, 5 South Park episodes were banned or removed from streaming because of their connection to Muhammad: Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200, and 201. As of 2026, all 5 of these episodes remain unavailable on Paramount+, the primary streaming platform for South Park. They were not included in the HBO Max streaming bundle when the show was available there. They are not available on the official South Park Studios website. They cannot be purchased digitally on major platforms. For all practical purposes, these episodes have been erased from the show's official catalog. There was additional international fallout. The depiction of Buddha snorting cocaine in episodes 200 and 201 prompted the government of Sri Lanka to ban the entire South Park series outright. This was separate from the Muhammad controversy. Sri Lanka's ban was specifically about the portrayal of Buddha, not Muhammad. India had already banned South Park in 2010 through the Ministry of Broadcasting due to extreme vulgarity. The show remained unavailable in India until Netflix acquired streaming rights in 2019, making it available with an 18+ rating. Zachary Adam Chesser, the author of the Revolution Muslim post that started the threats, was arrested in July 2010. He was not arrested for the South Park threats specifically, but for attempting to provide material support to the Somali terrorist group Al-Shabaab. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Despite the censorship, despite the banning, and despite the threats, Parker and Stone have never expressed regret about making these episodes. When asked whether they feared retribution, Parker stated that they would be hypocritical against their own values if they said they'd make fun of Catholics because Catholics won't hurt them, but wouldn't make fun of Muslims because Muslims might hurt them. He said the whole point of their show was that nobody gets special treatment. Everyone gets mocked equally. If you exempt one group because you're afraid of them, you're proving that violence works as a censorship tool. Both episodes, 200 and 201, were nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2010. Despite the controversy and the censorship, they did not win. The episodes remain the most extreme example of real-world consequences stemming from an animated television show. They resulted in genuine death threats, police involvement, corporate censorship against the creators' wishes, the banning of multiple episodes, and an international incident. They also remain the purest expression of what South Park has always been about. The show exists to say the things that nobody else will say, to mock the things that nobody else will mock, and to challenge the idea that any topic is too sacred for comedy. Episodes 200 and 201 tested that principle more severely than anything else Parker and Stone have ever created. The uncensored version of 201 remains available online through the leak from 2014. For fans who want to hear Kyle's full speech, who want to understand what Comedy Central was so afraid to broadcast, it can be found. The speech is scathing, it's darkly funny, and it's tragically relevant. It argues that the only way to get what you want in this world is to threaten people with violence. And the fact that Comedy Central proved this argument correct by censoring it is the greatest, darkest joke the show has ever told. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the most disturbing Christmas special ever broadcast on American television. And yes, that's a specific claim, and yes, it is entirely accurate. Season 8, Episode 14. Woodland Critter Christmas. This episode aired on December 15, 2004. It was the season finale. And what happens in this episode is so aggressively deranged, so completely unhinged from start to finish, that it makes everything else we've talked about so far look tame by comparison. Here's the thing about Woodland Critter Christmas that makes it different from the other episodes in this video. The episodes we've covered so far were offensive because of their real-world consequences. Death threats, banned episodes, corporate censorship, international incidents. Woodland Critter Christmas didn't cause any of that. It wasn't banned, it wasn't censored, it wasn't pulled from any streaming platform. It aired in its complete, unedited form on December 15, 2004, and it has remained available in that exact form ever since. It currently holds a 9.1 rating on IMDb. This episode is on this list because of what happens on screen. The content itself is so relentlessly offensive, so committed to escalating every possible taboo, that watching it for the first time feels like a test of endurance. And the whole time, it's presented in the style of a children's Christmas storybook, with rhyming narration and adorable woodland animals. Let me walk you through the entire thing. The episode opens with a narrator speaking in anapestic verse, which is the same poetic rhythm used in How the Grinch Stole Christmas and many Dr. Seuss books. The narrator describes a forest covered in snow. It's peaceful, it's beautiful. Christmas music plays. A boy in a red poofball hat walks through the forest. This is Stan Marsh. Stan encounters a group of 12 woodland animals gathered around a partially decorated Christmas tree. These animals are some of the cutest, most innocent-looking characters ever drawn in the history of South Park. They have enormous, shiny eyes. They wear little scarves and mittens. They speak in gentle southern accents. Their names are almost painfully adorable. Squirrely the squirrel, Beery the bear, Rabbity the rabbit, Beavery the beaver, Porcupiney the porcupine, Skunky the skunk, Foxy the fox, Deery the deer, Woodpeckery the woodpecker, Mousy the mouse, Raccoony the raccoon, and Chickadee the chickadee. The critters are overjoyed to see Stan. They ask him to help them make a star for the top of their Christmas tree. Stan is confused and slightly annoyed, but he helps them anyway. He makes the star, they cheer, he goes home. It seems like a sweet, if strange, holiday episode. That night, the critters show up in Stan's bedroom. They wake him up and explain that Porcupiney the porcupine is pregnant. She's carrying their savior, a baby who will be born on Christmas Day. But they need Stan's help to build a manger for the birth. Stan is tired and protests that he has school the next day, but the narrator pressures him into going along with it. He builds the manger, the critters celebrate. Then they tell Stan about a problem. Every year, one of the critters gets pregnant with their savior, and every year, before the baby can be born, a mountain lion comes down from the hills and kills the pregnant critter. The mountain lion has prevented the birth of their savior every single time. They beg Stan to go up to the mountain and kill the lion so that this year, the baby can finally be born. Stan doesn't want to do this. He's a 9-year-old kid. He doesn't want to fight a mountain lion. But the critters are so sweet, so desperate, so innocent looking that he feels guilty. The narrator pushes him along. He goes up the mountain. He finds the lion's cave. And after a struggle, he kills the mountain lion. But the moment the lion dies, Stan makes a horrible discovery. The mountain lion was a mother. She has 3 baby cubs. They're tiny and helpless, huddled together in the cave. One of them looks up at Stan and asks in a small, broken voice, "Mommy?" Stan feels terrible. He just orphaned 3 baby animals. He walks back down the mountain carrying the weight of what he's done. He returns to the critters to tell them the mountain lion is dead, and this is where the episode detonates. The critters don't react the way Stan expected. They don't celebrate Christmas or thank God or sing carols. Instead, they celebrate by sacrificing Rabbity the rabbit. They tear him apart. They devour his flesh. And then, in a sequence that was directly inspired by the blood orgy scene from the 1997 science fiction horror film Event Horizon, the woodland critters have an orgy in Rabbity's blood. Stan stands there in absolute shock, covered in splattered blood, watching 12 adorable cartoon animals commit ritual sacrifice and engage in graphic acts in the remains of their friend. The narrator continues describing the scene in cheerful, rhyming verse, as if nothing unusual is happening. Stan finally finds the ability to speak and asks what in the world is going on. The critters explain everything. Their savior is not the son of God. Their savior is the son of Satan. They are Satanists. They worship the devil. The baby porcupine he is carrying is the Antichrist. And Stan just killed the one creature on Earth that could have prevented the Antichrist from being born. The mountain lion wasn't a villain. She was the only thing standing between the world and the apocalypse, and Stan murdered her. Deery? The deer explains the logic with perfect cheerfulness. She asks Stan if he really thought God would have sex with Porcupine. Only Satan, the Prince of Darkness and King of all evil, would do that. Chickadee adds a chipper, yay, at the end. Stan tries to stop them. He tries to tear down the manger, but the critters attack him with what they call their evil satanic powers. They conjure hellfire. They summon demons. They blast Stan with dark magic. The cute little animals in scarves and mittens are wielding genuine supernatural evil, and Stan can't do anything to stop them. Stan retreats. He tries to just go home and pretend none of this happened, but the narrator won't let him. The rhyming narration literally forces Stan to keep participating in the story. The narrator describes Stan going back to the mountain to recruit the orphan mountain lion cubs, and Stan has no choice but to comply. Stan returns to the cave and finds the 3 baby mountain lions. He explains the situation. The Antichrist is about to be born. Only a mountain lion can stop it. But the cubs are tiny. They're babies. They can't fight a group of satanic woodland creatures with supernatural powers. They need to learn a very specific skill to prevent the Antichrist from being born. They need to learn how to perform an abortion. The narrator describes Stan taking the mountain lion cubs to an abortion clinic. Stan protests this violently. He does not want to take baby animals to learn about abortion, but the narration overrides his objections. The narrator describes the scene in the same lilting, cheerful Dr. Seuss rhythm while the mountain lion cubs learn the procedure. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the woodland critters have a new problem. The Antichrist can't just be born. It needs a human host to possess once it arrives. Specifically, it needs an unbaptized, non-Christian human. The critters go searching for one. They discover Kyle Broflovsky, who tells them he's Jewish and doesn't celebrate Christmas. The critters are thrilled. Kyle is the perfect vessel. The critters lure Kyle into the forest and tie him to a satanic altar. He is going to be the host body for the Antichrist. The ritual begins. Stan arrives with the mountain lion cubs just as the Antichrist is being born. It emerges as a small, hideous, hairless creature that snarls and hisses. The birth is complete. The critters cheer. Kyle is strapped to the altar, about to be possessed by the spawn of Satan. And then Santa Claus shows up. Santa arrives on the scene. He takes one look at the situation. He sees the satanic woodland critters. He sees the Antichrist. He sees Kyle tied to the altar. He assesses the situation quickly, and then Santa Claus pulls out a SPAS-12 combat shotgun and begins systematically executing every single woodland critter. He shoots them one by one. Barry the bear tries to talk his way out of it. Santa shoots him mid-sentence. Squirrely the squirrel begs for mercy. Santa shoots him. Foxy, raccoony, deery, skunky, beavery. One by one, Santa walks through the forest and kills them all with his shotgun. Blood splatters across the snow. The cheerful Christmas music continues playing underneath the carnage. When every critter is dead, Santa turns to the Antichrist. Stan explains that without a human host, the creature will die on its own. They just need to wait. The crisis is over. Christmas is saved. But Kyle, who has been freed from the altar, suddenly announces that he wants to be possessed by the Antichrist. He says he wants to use the Antichrist's power to make the world better for Jewish people. He allows the demon to enter his body. Kyle begins hovering in the air, glowing with dark energy, about to unleash devastation on the world. And then the episode cuts away. We're suddenly in Mr. Garrison's classroom at South Park Elementary. The camera pulls back to reveal that the entire story has been a narrative written by Eric Cartman as a class assignment. Cartman has been standing in front of the class, reading his Christmas story aloud. This is not real. None of it actually happened. The woodland critters, the Antichrist, Santa with a shotgun, all of it was a story written by Cartman specifically designed to torment Kyle. Kyle is furious. He interrupts and demands that Cartman stop. Mr. Garrison, who has been listening to this entire horror show without much reaction, decides he doesn't want to deal with the argument and tells Cartman to just wrap it up. Cartman finishes his story quickly. The narrator announces that everyone lived happily ever after, except for Kyle, who died of AIDS 2 weeks later. Kyle screams, "God damn it, Cartman!" The episode ends. The genius of this episode, and the reason it holds a 9.1 on IMDb, is the metastructure. Everything you just watched was a story within a story. Cartman created the most offensive Christmas tale imaginable specifically to upset Kyle. The Satanism, the blood orgies, the abortion, Kyle being chosen as the host for the Antichrist because he's Jewish, Kyle dying of AIDS at the end, All of it was Cartman using creative writing as a weapon to psychologically torment his classmate, which means the episode isn't just offensive content for the sake of being offensive. It's a story about a character who creates offensive content for the specific purpose of causing pain. Cartman isn't just a sociopath in this episode, he's a writer. He's using narrative as violence. And the fact that Mr. Garrison barely reacts to any of it, that the adults in the room don't intervene until Kyle complains, is itself a commentary on how extreme content gets normalized when it's presented in a familiar, comfortable format. The Woodland critters look like characters from a children's special. They speak in gentle voices, the narration rhymes like Dr. Seuss, the Christmas music plays throughout. Everything about the presentation says safe and wholesome. And underneath all of that, animals are being sacrificed, demons are being summoned, and the Antichrist is being born. The episode is arguing that packaging matters, that you can slip almost anything past people if you wrap it in the right presentation. And isn't that exactly what South Park itself does? It's a show about 8-year-olds made with construction paper cutout animation that regularly deals with murder, genocide, and the end of the world. Behind the scenes, the creation of this episode was chaotic. Trey Parker was stuck with no episode idea, and the production deadline was approaching fast. In creator commentary recorded for the DVD, Parker explained that he spent all day Friday trying to come up with something. Nothing was working. He started writing pages on Saturday morning about cute forest animals, mostly as a placeholder. On Saturday afternoon, the breakthrough came. Matt Stone suggested making the critters Satanists, and Parker immediately knew the episode would work. Stone later confirmed that the blood orgy idea came specifically from the film Event Horizon, a 1997 science fiction horror movie starring Lawrence Fishburne. In the film, a crew explores an abandoned spaceship and eventually finds footage of what happened to the previous crew. The footage shows a horrifying scene of the crew members engaging in a violent, bloody orgy while tearing each other apart. Stone said this scene had always stuck with him, and he saw the perfect opportunity to reference it using adorable woodland animals. Parker recalled driving home from the studio on Saturday night after the episode finally came together. He spontaneously screamed in his car, not out of frustration, but out of relief and excitement. He realized they weren't just going to make the deadline, they were going to close out the season with something genuinely great. The Woodland critters went on to become recurring characters in the South Park universe, which is remarkable considering they were originally fictional even within the show's own fiction. They appeared in the Imagination Land trilogy in Season 11, where they were among the most feared and violent characters on the evil side of Imagination Land. In those episodes, they tortured Strawberry Shortcake and attacked Popeye in scenes that were so graphic they happened entirely off-screen, with the viewer only hearing the sounds. They also appeared in both South Park video games. In South Park, The Stick of Truth, players can find the critters in a hidden clearing in the forest. They ask the player to accept Satan as their lord. If the player agrees, all 12 critters immediately friend them on Facebook. In South Park, The Fractured But Whole, the critters appear as a boss battle. Most recently, the Woodland critters appeared in Season 28, Episode 5, The Crap Out, which aired on December 10th, 2025. In this episode, the critters are no longer fictional. Through a series of increasingly meta-plot developments involving Satan, Donald Trump, and a character named Peter Thiel, the Woodland critters manifest in the real world of South Park. They ally with Satan against the Christians and participate in the season's climactic story arc. The fact that characters created as a joke within a Cartman story assignment in 2004 are now fully canon participants in the show's main storyline 21 years later is one of the most bizarre evolutionary arcs in television history. But that's South Park. Nothing is ever truly fictional, nothing is ever truly disposable, and nothing is ever too offensive to bring back. Woodland Critter Christmas remains one of the most celebrated episodes in the show's catalog. It's frequently ranked in the top 10 or top 20 lists of the best South Park episodes ever made. It airs in reruns every December. Parents who grew up watching it now show it to their own children as a dark, twisted alternative to traditional holiday specials. And the image of Santa Claus methodically executing satanic woodland animals with a combat shotgun has become one of the most iconic visual gags in the history of the series. It's a Christmas special about blood orgies, the Antichrist, and abortion performed by baby mountain lions. It's narrated in Dr. Seuss rhymes. It was created in less than a week because Trey Parker couldn't think of anything else. And it's perfect. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the episode that proved South Park could still shake the foundations of geopolitical power in its 23rd season. Banned in China, Season 23, Episode 2. This episode aired on October 2nd, 2019, and within hours of its broadcast, the most populous country on Earth decided that South Park no longer existed. The entire franchise was erased from the Chinese internet. Every episode, every clip, every fan discussion, gone. In a single evening, two guys from Colorado accomplished something that most political activists and international organizations have spent decades failing to achieve. They got the Chinese government to publicly acknowledge that a cartoon hurt its feelings. To understand why this specific episode struck such a nerve, you need to understand the broader context of what was happening in 2019. For years, Hollywood studios had been voluntarily censoring their films to gain access to the Chinese box office, which by 2019 had become one of the largest film markets in the world. Movies with significant Chinese audiences were worth hundreds of millions of extra dollars. Studios were willing to do almost anything to access that money. And almost anything turned out to include some pretty dramatic compromises. Studios were editing out references to Tibet, Taiwan, and any political content that the Chinese Communist Party might find unfavorable. Characters who were supposed to be Tibetan were rewritten as Nepalese. Scenes referencing Taiwanese independence were cut. Villains who were Chinese in the original scripts were changed to other nationalities. Films were being rewritten to include positive portrayals of China that weren't in the original creative vision. Some movies even cast Chinese actors in prominent roles purely to appeal to Chinese censors rather than because the story required it. This was not a secret. Industry journalists had been writing about it for years. Everyone in Hollywood knew it was happening, but nobody was willing to say it out loud on the record because the money was too good. Parker and Stone said it out loud. Banned in China runs two parallel storylines. In the first, Randy Marsh travels to China to expand his marijuana business, Tegrity Farms, into the Chinese market. Randy is excited about the business opportunity, but once he arrives in China, things go wrong quickly. Randy ends up in a work camp. And in that work camp, his cellmate is Winnie the Pooh. This is a reference to a very real and very specific piece of internet censorship. In China, Winnie the Pooh had been banned from social media because Chinese internet users had been using images of the cartoon bear to mock President Xi Jinping. The comparison started as a meme, side-by-side images of Xi Jinping and Winnie the Pooh making similar facial expressions circulated online. The Chinese government was so offended by this comparison that they banned Winnie the Pooh from Chinese social media entirely. The 2018 film Christopher Robin was denied a release in China, reportedly because of the Pooh-Xi connection. So in the episode, Randy Marsh is imprisoned alongside Winnie the Pooh in a Chinese work camp. The bear is depicted as a prisoner of the Chinese government, locked up because of the meme. Throughout their scenes together, Pooh speaks in his classic, gentle, innocent voice while surrounded by the horrors of forced labor. The juxtaposition is both funny and pointed. In the second storyline, the boys at South Park Elementary form a death metal band. They're excited about making music and becoming famous. They attract the attention of a talent manager who is eager to help them succeed. But the manager has one condition. If the band wants to make it big, they need to appeal to the Chinese market. And that means changing their content. The manager starts telling the boys what they can't say, what they can't show, and what topics they need to avoid. References to Tibet are out. Anything critical of the Chinese government is out. Gay relationships might need to be removed because China censors those. The manager progressively strips away everything that makes the band unique and authentic, replacing it with bland, inoffensive content designed to pass Chinese censors. The boys push back. They argue that their art should be their art. The manager explains that the Chinese market is worth too much money. They either conform or they stay small. The episode presents this as the exact dilemma that real Hollywood studios face, but boiled down to its simplest terms. Do you keep your creative integrity or do you sell it for access to 1 billion potential customers? The episode doesn't pretend this is a complicated moral question. It presents the answer as obvious. You keep your integrity. You don't let a foreign government dictate what you can create. And anyone who makes a different choice is a coward. The episode ends with Randy being released from the Chinese work camp, but not before a disturbing scene in which he's forced to kill Winnie the Pooh in front of government officials to prove his loyalty. It's graphic and uncomfortable and deliberately designed to mirror the kinds of loyalty tests that authoritarian regimes impose on their citizens. The metaphor is clear. Hollywood studios are metaphorically killing their own creative output to prove loyalty to the Chinese market. The Chinese government's response was immediate and unprecedented. Within hours of the episode airing in the United States, South Park was completely erased from the Chinese internet. This was not a targeted removal of the offending episode. This was a total franchise erasure. Every single episode of South Park, all 23 seasons at that point, was removed from Baidu, which is China's equivalent of Google. Search results for South Park returned nothing. The show was removed from Douban, which is China's equivalent of IMDb, where users rate and review entertainment. It was removed from Bilibili, which is China's equivalent of YouTube. It was removed from Zhihu, which functions like China's Quora, where users ask and answer questions. It was removed from Sina Weibo, China's version of Twitter, and it was removed from WeChat, which is the primary messaging and social media platform used by over 1 billion Chinese citizens. Fan-created content was also targeted. Forum posts discussing South Park were deleted. Fan art was removed. Discussion threads that mentioned the show were scrubbed. The government didn't just ban the show, they attempted to eliminate all evidence that anyone in China had ever watched it or talked about it. Parker and Stone's response was legendary. They released a statement that was immediately recognized worldwide as one of the greatest pieces of satirical writing of the decade. The statement read, in part, that like the NBA, they welcome the Chinese censors into their homes and into their hearts. They said they too love money more than freedom and democracy. They said she doesn't look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. The statement ended with the line, "Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn sorghum harvest be a bountiful one. We good now, China?" The statement was universally understood as sarcasm. It was a mock apology that mocked the very concept of apologizing to an authoritarian government. It went viral globally. It was covered by every major news outlet in the Western world. It was shared millions of times on social media. Parker and Stone became folk heroes in the free speech community overnight. The timing of the statement was also significant. It dropped during the same week that the NBA was embroiled in its own China controversy. Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, had tweeted support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. The Chinese Basketball Association suspended its relationship with the Rockets in response. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver tried to navigate the situation diplomatically, essentially apologizing while also defending free speech, pleasing nobody on either side. Parker and Stone's reference to the NBA and their mock apology was deliberate. They were drawing a direct comparison between the NBA's awkward attempt to keep Chinese money while vaguely supporting free speech, and South Park's approach, which was to simply not care about the money at all. South Park would never air in China again. Parker and Stone were fine with that. They didn't need China's permission to make their show, and they wanted every studio, every sports league, and every corporation that was self-censoring for Chinese money to feel embarrassed by the comparison. The China ban was not South Park's first experience with being banned in a country. India had banned the show outright in 2010 through the Ministry of Broadcasting, citing extreme vulgarity. The ban was comprehensive, covering all seasons and specials. South Park remained completely unavailable in India for nearly a decade until Netflix India acquired streaming rights in 2019 and made the show available with an 18+ rating. South Park has also been banned or heavily restricted in several other countries over the years. The show was removed from SBS in Australia in 2020, though it remained available through other platforms. Various episodes have been edited or pulled in different markets for different reasons. The Bloody Mary episode from Season 9, which depicted a statue of the Virgin Mary menstruating on Pope Benedict XVI, was protested by the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights in the United States and generated complaints in multiple Catholic majority countries. The Catholic League lobbied unsuccessfully to have the episode permanently removed. The South Park video game, The Stick of Truth, was initially banned in Australia, because of interactive sequences involving alien anal probing and an abortion minigame. A censored version was eventually released for Australian, European, and Israeli markets, with the offending interactive sections replaced by text descriptions of what was happening, narrated in a deadpan comedic style that some reviewers said was actually funnier than the original uncensored content. But the China ban stands apart from all of these other restrictions because of its scale and its permanence. India eventually allowed the show back in. Australia's restrictions were limited to specific platforms. The Catholic League's protests didn't result in any episodes being pulled. The China ban, by contrast, was total. As of 2026, South Park remains completely banned in mainland China. This includes all 28 seasons, the theatrical film, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, all of the Paramount Plus specials, and all of the video games. The franchise simply does not exist within the Chinese internet. Banned in China itself remains freely available on every Western platform. It was never pulled or censored in the United States, Europe, or any other Western market. You can stream it right now on Paramount Plus. Nickelodeon's parent company made no attempt to appease China or soften the episode. Parker and Stone's mock apology made it clear that they had no interest in reconciliation. The episode demonstrated something important about the power of comedy in the modern world. In 2019, South Park was a 22-year-old cartoon. It aired on basic cable. Its animation style hadn't fundamentally changed since the late 1990s. It was made by two guys in a small production studio in Los Angeles using a 6-day production cycle. And yet this show, this small, crude, deliberately ugly cartoon, managed to provoke the government of a nuclear superpower into taking official action. China didn't ban South Park because the show was dangerous in any military or economic sense. They banned it because it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing to have an American cartoon point out that the world's second largest economy was so insecure that it couldn't handle jokes about its leader looking like a cartoon bear. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have always maintained that their show treats everyone equally. They mock liberals and conservatives. They mock Christians and Muslims and Scientologists and Mormons. They mock America and they mock every other country. The China episode was consistent with this philosophy. They weren't singling out China for special criticism. They were treating China the same way they'd treated every other institution that tried to control speech through intimidation. The only difference was that China had the power to actually follow through on its displeasure. And even that didn't matter because Parker and Stone had already made their point. The mock apology remains one of the most widely quoted statements in the history of the show. It's been printed on t-shirts. It's been cited in academic papers about free speech and censorship. It's been referenced by political commentators, journalists, and comedians. And it accomplished something that years of diplomatic pressure and international criticism failed to achieve. It made the Chinese government's censorship apparatus look petty and small. Not through confrontation, not through political activism, through a joke, a really good joke. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now, before we close out this video, there are a few more pieces of South Park's offensive legacy that deserve attention. Because the episodes we've covered tonight are the most extreme examples, but they exist within a much larger pattern. South Park has been pushing boundaries since the very beginning. And the very beginning wasn't even the television show, it was a movie. And that movie broke records that nobody thought an animated film could break. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was released on June 30th, 1999, less than 2 years after the television series debuted. The film was written by Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and Pam Brady. It was directed by Parker. And it was the single most profane animated film ever made at the time of its release. The Guinness Book of World Records certified it in their 2001 edition for the most swearing in an animated film. The exact numbers vary depending on the source, but the film contains approximately 399 profane words, which works out to roughly 5 per minute for the entire runtime. The movie's plot is a satirical look at censorship, moral panic, and the way parents blame entertainment for their children's behavior. In the film, the boys sneak into a Canadian movie called Asses of Fire, starring their favorite comedians Terrence and Phillip. The movie is obscene, the boys love it, they start repeating the language they learned, their parents find out. And instead of taking responsibility for their own children's behavior, the parents of South Park launch a campaign against Canada itself. They form an organization called Mothers Against Canada. The situation escalates into a full-scale war between the United States and Canada, complete with military operations, prisoner of war camps, and a planned execution of Terrence and Philip on live television. The details of this escalation are worth walking through because they mirror real-world overreactions to entertainment content with eerie precision. After the boys see the movie, they start swearing constantly at school. Their teacher, Mr. Garrison, reports the language to the school counselor, Mr. Mackey. Mackey notifies their parents. The mothers of South Park, led by Kyle's mother, Sheila Broflovsky, are horrified. But instead of simply grounding their children or talking to them about language, the mothers form Mothers Against Canada, or MAC, and begin a political crusade against the entire country of Canada. The situation spirals out of control. Terrence and Philip, the Canadian comedians who made the offending movie, are arrested while appearing on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. The Canadian government demands their return. The American government refuses. Diplomacy collapses. The United States declares war on Canada. Actual military operations begin. American troops invade Canadian soil. And the execution of Terrence and Philip is scheduled as a public event to be broadcast live on television as a statement against Canadian influence on American children. This is a satirical exaggeration, obviously, but the logic underneath it is uncomfortably real. Parents see something offensive. Instead of managing their own household, they demand systemic action. Instead of turning off the television, they try to destroy the source. And the cycle of overreaction escalates until the original problem, kids learning some new swear words, has been buried under an international military conflict. While all of this is happening, Kenny dies. This is standard for South Park. Kenny dies in almost every early episode. But in the film, his death has actual consequences. Kenny goes to hell, where he discovers that Satan is planning to invade Earth. Satan is depicted as a sympathetic, emotionally vulnerable character who happens to be in an abusive romantic relationship with Saddam Hussein. Saddam is cruel, manipulative, and only interested in physical intimacy. Satan wants genuine love and respect. The relationship between Satan and Saddam becomes one of the movie's most surprisingly effective subplots. Satan is basically a lonely person trapped in a bad relationship. And the fact that he's also the Prince of Darkness makes the emotional beats funnier without undermining them. Kenny learns that if Terrence and Philip are executed, it will fulfill a biblical prophecy and open a portal between hell and earth, allowing Satan and his army to invade. Kenny has to find a way to warn his friends. The boys, meanwhile, form a resistance group called La Resistance, inspired by the Les Miserables song of the same name, and plan to infiltrate the execution and rescue Terrence and Philip before it's too late. The climax is a massive set piece. The boys storm the execution. Cartman has a V-chip implanted in his body that shocks him every time he swears, but he discovers that the electrical surges can be used as a weapon. He starts swearing deliberately, channeling the shocks into energy blasts that he uses to fight off soldiers. Kyle confronts his mother about her crusade. Stan delivers a speech about personal responsibility versus censorship. And in the end, Kenny sacrifices himself to close the portal to hell, saving the world. His reward is being sent to heaven, where he's greeted by a group of beautiful women. It's a surprisingly emotional ending for a character whose entire role in the series is dying in increasingly absurd ways. The film was a genuine musical. Parker and composer Mark Shaman wrote original songs for the movie, including Blame Canada, Kyle's Mom's a Bitch, What Would Brian Boitano Do, and Uncle Fucka. The music was genuinely well crafted. The songs were catchy, well-produced, and funny. And Blame Canada was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song at the 72nd Academy Awards in 2000. This is worth pausing on. South Park, the show that had been called vulgar, juvenile, and morally bankrupt by critics and parent groups for 2 straight years, was nominated for an Oscar. The ceremony was held on March 26, 2000. Robin Williams performed Blame Canada on the Oscar stage. The song lost to Phil Collins' You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan. Parker and Stone attended the ceremony. According to multiple reports, they arrived wearing dresses, not as a joke about gender or identity, They just thought it would be funny to show up at the most prestigious event in entertainment wearing women's clothing. The story goes that they had been drinking before the ceremony and decided it would be the most South Park thing possible to walk the red carpet in gowns. They later admitted they were on acid during the ceremony. The Oscar nomination was remarkable because the film itself was relentlessly offensive. Beyond the record-setting profanity, the movie depicted Satan and Saddam Hussein as romantic partners, showed graphic animated violence, featured children engaging in warfare, and contained songs with titles that cannot be repeated in most professional contexts. It was rated R for pervasive vulgar language and crude sexual humor and violent images. And yet the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences looked past all of that and nominated one of its songs for their highest honor. The film grossed over $83 million worldwide against a budget of $21 million. Critics gave it surprisingly positive reviews. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars out of 4, calling it a vicious, take-no-prisoners social satire. The film proved that South Park could work outside the confines of a 22-minute television episode. It could sustain a feature-length narrative, it could produce genuine musical quality, and it could get nominated for an Oscar while containing more profanity than any animated film in history. The movie also established the template for how South Park would handle censorship going forward. The entire plot was about moral panic over offensive content. The parents in the film blame Canada for corrupting their children, when the real problem is their own lack of parenting. The movie was making the exact same argument that Parker and Stone would make repeatedly over the next 2 decades. Don't blame the content, blame the people who can't handle the content. Censorship doesn't protect anyone. It just gives power to the people doing the censoring. Beyond the movie, the television series has produced a long list of episodes that generated significant controversy and outrage beyond the ones we've already covered in detail. Season 11, Episode 1, With Apologies to Jesse Jackson, aired on March 7, 2007. In this episode, Randy Marsh appears on the game show Wheel of Fortune. The puzzle on the board reads N_GGERS. The category is People Who Annoy You. Randy buzzes in confidently and says the N-word on live television, believing the answer is the racial slur rather than the actual answer, which is naggers. The audience gasps in horror. The host stares at him in disbelief. Randy stands there with his arms raised in triumph, slowly realizing what he's done as the silence fills the studio. His face drops. The moment is excruciating. Randy becomes a social pariah overnight. The news covers the incident constantly. His face is everywhere. People recognize him in public and turn away in disgust. He can't go to the grocery store without being confronted. His family is humiliated. Stan is bullied at school because his father is now the N-word guy. Randy tries to apologize. He goes on a national apology tour. He meets with Jesse Jackson. He kisses Jesse Jackson's rear end, literally, because that's the show's interpretation of what a public apology to a civil rights leader looks like. But none of it works. Nobody forgives him. Nobody moves on. The apology circuit doesn't actually heal anything. It's just performance. Meanwhile, a parallel storyline follows a character named Dr. David Nelson, a little person who teaches at the school. Cartman can't stop making jokes about Nelson's height. Nelson confronts Cartman. Cartman doesn't care. Nelson goes through legal channels, getting a congressional bill passed that bans the use of the word midget because it's offensive. Cartman continues using it. Nelson takes him to court. The episode uses this subplot to explore a parallel question about who has the right to determine when language causes harm and what power language holds over people. The episode eventually brings both storylines together at a congressional hearing where Randy testifies about his experience. Stan, throughout the episode, has been trying to understand what his black classmate Token feels about the situation. Stan keeps telling Token that he gets it. Token keeps telling Stan that he doesn't. At the end of the episode, Stan finally has a breakthrough. He tells Token, "I get it now, I don't get it." The realization is that a white person can never fully understand the experience of a black person hearing that word. And the acknowledgement of that gap, the admission that understanding is impossible, is itself a form of respect. What's remarkable about this episode is how it was received. The NAACP-linked organization Abolish the N-Word actually came out in support of the episode, praising it for depicting how harmful the word can be and showing real consequences for using it. Meanwhile, the Parents Television Council condemned the episode, calling it irresponsible. The same word was being evaluated completely differently depending on who was watching and what lens they were using. The episode is considered one of South Park's most thoughtful explorations of race in America. Randy's use of the word isn't played for cheap laughs. He faces genuine social consequences. He's shunned by his community. He's forced to apologize, and the episode's broader message is multi-layered. No amount of apologizing can erase the impact of using that word. The word has power specifically because of history, and no amount of context or good intentions changes what it means to the people it hurts. But the episode also argues that the performative apology circuit that American public figures go through after saying something offensive is itself hollow. It's theater. Randy kissing Jesse Jackson's rear end doesn't help anyone. Real understanding comes from admitting what you don't understand, not from pretending you've learned a lesson in 5 minutes of screen time. Season 9, Episode 14, Bloody Mary, aired on December 7th, 2005. In this episode, Randy Marsh is arrested for drunk driving. He crashes his car on the way home from a party. He's handcuffed, processed, and ordered by the court to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as part of his sentence. At the AA meetings, Randy is told that alcoholism is a disease. He's told that he's powerless over his addiction. He's told that the only way to recover is to admit he has no control and surrender to a higher power. Randy takes this message to heart in the most literal way possible. He immediately begins behaving as though he is completely disabled by his disease. He gets into a wheelchair. He stops functioning as a normal adult. He tells his family that he can't do anything because he has a disease, and diseases are things you can't control. Stan watches his father deteriorate from a functional adult into a helpless shell of a person, all because someone at a meeting told him he was powerless. Meanwhile, across town, a statue of the Virgin Mary at a local Catholic church begins bleeding. Specifically, it's bleeding from its rear end. News spreads quickly. Pilgrims from across the country flock to the church to witness the miracle. Lines stretch for blocks. People bring their sick relatives. The bleeding statue is treated as a genuine divine event, capable of curing illness and spiritual ailment. Randy hears about the miracle and decides that the Virgin Mary statue can cure his alcoholism. If it's a disease and the statue has divine healing power, then surely it can fix him. He makes the pilgrimage. He waits in line. He positions himself under the statue and receives the blood directly on his face. He's convinced he's been cured. Then Pope Benedict XVI arrives to investigate the miracle personally. The Pope examines the statue. He determines that the statue is bleeding from the wrong end. If the statue were bleeding from the front, it would be miraculous. But from the back, that's not a miracle. That's just a mess. The Pope dismisses the entire event. The crowd is devastated. Randy's supposed cure is invalidated. The episode's actual message comes from Stan, who confronts his father at the end. Stan tells Randy that alcoholism might not be a disease in the way AA describes it. He argues that treating it as something you're completely powerless over gives you an excuse not to try. Stan suggests that maybe, just maybe, his dad could control his drinking if he actually took personal responsibility instead of hiding behind the label of disease and waiting for a miracle to fix him. Randy considers this. He puts down his wheelchair. He stands up. He decides he can probably manage to have just 1 or 2 drinks and not let it destroy his life. The episode ends with Randy cautiously re-entering the world as a functioning adult. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights responded with fury. William Donahue, the president of the Catholic League, called the episode the most vile and offensive depiction of the Virgin Mary in the history of American television. The organization launched a formal campaign against Comedy Central, demanding that the episode be pulled from rotation permanently. They organized letter-writing campaigns. They contacted advertisers. They tried every pressure tactic available to a religious advocacy group in the mid-2000s. Comedy Central did not pull the episode. They acknowledged the complaints. They expressed respect for the Catholic faith, and they continued airing the episode. It has remained in rotation ever since, and is currently available on Paramount Plus without any edits or disclaimers. The Catholic League's campaign failed completely, which, from Parker and Stone's perspective, was itself a validation of their worldview. They had demonstrated once again that organized outrage without the threat of violence behind it simply doesn't work as a censorship tool. The Catholic League could write as many letters as they wanted. Without the implicit threat that their members would physically harm someone, there was no mechanism to force the network to comply. Compare this to the Muhammad episodes, where actual death threats succeeded in getting content permanently banned, and you see the dark logic that South Park spent years exposing. Polite outrage accomplishes nothing. Only fear accomplishes censorship. That's a deeply cynical worldview, but South Park's own history proves it correct. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights went ballistic. They launched a campaign against the episode, demanding that Comedy Central pull it from rotation and never air it again. They called it the most vile and offensive episode in the show's history up to that point. They argued that depicting the Virgin Mary menstruating on the Pope was beyond the bounds of acceptable satire. Comedy Central did not pull the episode. It has remained in rotation and is currently available on Paramount+. Season 5, Episode 3, Super Best Friends, aired on July 4th, 2001. This is the episode we mentioned earlier in the context of the 200 and 201 controversy. In it, the boys encounter a group of religious figures who function as a superhero team. The team includes Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Moses, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, and Muhammad. Muhammad is depicted using fire powers and is treated as just another member of the team. He's animated normally. He speaks dialogue. He's shown on screen without any censorship. When this episode aired in 2001, nobody cared. There were no protests. There were no complaints. There were no death threats. Muhammad had been shown on South Park and the world didn't end. But after the 200 and 201 controversy in 2010, Comedy Central went back and retroactively pulled Super Best Friends from all platforms. An episode that had aired without incident for 9 years was suddenly deemed too dangerous to show. This retroactive ban is perhaps the most troubling of all the censorship decisions Comedy Central has made regarding South Park. It means that content which was perfectly acceptable at one point in time can be deemed unacceptable later. Not because the content changed, but because the climate around it changed. South Park has also tackled school shootings, transgender issues, climate change, the Me Too movement, COVID-19, and virtually every other major social issue of the past 3 decades. The show produced extended pandemic specials during COVID-19, including the Pandemic Special in 2020, which was nominated for an Emmy. It has produced multiple Paramount Plus specials, exploring topics like obesity, streaming wars, and AI. Season 27, which aired in 2025, featured a highly serialized narrative centered on a caricature of Donald Trump depicted in an abusive romantic relationship with Satan. The season premiere attracted 5.9 million cross-platform viewers in its first 3 days, a 68% increase over the previous season's premiere. It was Comedy Central's biggest premiere viewership share since 1999. Season 28, which also aired in 2025, continued the political satire with storylines involving Trump, J.D. Vance, and a version of Jesus Christ who gets into a physical fight with PEC principle over modern Christianity. The show has been renewed through at least 2029 or 2030, meaning South Park will be on the air for more than 30 years. Parker and Stone signed a deal reportedly worth $900 million, widely cited as part of a broader package valued at approximately $1.5 billion. This makes South Park one of the most valuable entertainment properties in television history. And through all of it, through nearly 3 decades of controversy, lawsuits, bans, death threats, corporate censorship, and international incidents, Parker and Stone have never fundamentally changed their approach. They still write every episode in approximately 6 days. They still voice most of the characters themselves. They still refuse to treat any topic as off-limits. And they still believe that comedy's job is to say the things that everyone is thinking, but nobody has the nerve to say out loud. That 6-day production cycle is worth understanding because it explains so much about why South Park feels different from every other animated show. Most animated series take months, sometimes a full year, to produce a single episode. The Simpsons takes roughly 6 to 8 months per episode. Family Guy operates on a similar timeline. The animation is sent overseas, the voice acting is recorded months in advance, and the scripts are locked in long before they air. This means those shows can't respond to current events. by the time an episode airs, the moment it was written about has already passed. South Park is the opposite. Parker and Stone built their production pipeline specifically to allow near real-time commentary. They write the script on a Thursday or Friday. The voice recording happens the same weekend. The animation team works around the clock using proprietary software that evolved from the show's original construction paper stop-motion look into a fully digital pipeline. The episode is delivered to Comedy Central sometimes just hours before it airs on Wednesday night. This is why South Park can reference events that happen the week before the episode broadcasts. No other animated show in the world operates this way. This production speed has caused problems. In 2013, a power outage at the studio delayed the season 17 premiere episode. The lights went out, the computers crashed, and the team had to scramble to deliver the episode on an even tighter deadline than usual. More recently, in 2025, the creators missed their production deadline entirely on the 5th episode of season 27. They issued a public apology for the missed delivery, one of the only times in the show's history that an episode wasn't ready on time. But these incidents are the exceptions. For over 300 episodes across 28 seasons, Parker and Stone have maintained a pace that would destroy most production teams. Trey Parker has written 325 episodes and directed 317 of them. Matt Stone has written 28 episodes and directed 9. Those numbers are staggering when you consider that most television writers work in rooms of 10 or more people, and most directors rotate across episodes. Parker does nearly everything himself. He writes, he directs, he voices most of the major male characters, including Cartman, Stan, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Randy Marsh, Butters, Jimmy, Timmy, Craig, and dozens of others. Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters' father, Jimbo, and several other recurring characters. Between the two of them, they are the voices of almost every character on the show. The original pilot episode was animated using actual construction paper cutouts, physically moved frame by frame under a camera. This process was excruciatingly slow. It took Parker and Stone months to produce just a few minutes of animation. When Nickelodeon's parent company saw the results and liked them, the team immediately switched to digital animation that replicated the construction paper look. The visual style hasn't changed fundamentally since then, which is deliberate. Parker has said in interviews that the deliberately crude, flat animation is part of the show's identity. Making it look more sophisticated would miss the point. The ugliness is the aesthetic. It signals to the viewer that this show doesn't take itself seriously, and you shouldn't either. That visual signal gives them permission to say things that a more polished show couldn't get away with. The show has been produced under several different studio names. The original pilot was produced by Games Animation, which was renamed Nickelodeon Animation Studio in 1998. Parker and Stone created their own production company, South Park Digital Studios, which handles the animation. Their creative company is called Important Studios. Their production vanity card is called United Plankton Pictures, though this has evolved over the years. The show's music has been composed by several people, including Adam Berry in the early seasons and later Scott Nickley and Jamie Dunlap. The iconic theme song was written and performed by Les Claypool of the band Primus. It has been revised multiple times over the years, including a bluegrass version, a rock version, and an orchestral arrangement for season 25. The financial side of South Park is equally remarkable. When the show premiered in 1997, it was a small cable experiment on a network that most Americans had never heard of. Within a year, it had boosted Comedy Central's subscriber count from approximately 9 million households to 50 million. That is an increase of over 400%, driven almost entirely by one show. South Park didn't just succeed on Comedy Central. South Park made Comedy Central. Before South Park, Comedy Central was a niche channel that most cable providers didn't bother to carry. After South Park, it was must-have programming. The show has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program, earned a Peabody Award for Distinguished and Biting Social Commentary, received a Critics' Choice Television Award for Best Animated Series in 2025, and earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song. It boosted Comedy Central's subscriber count from approximately 9 million households to 50 million households in just its first year on the air. It has been translated into dozens of languages, aired in countries around the world, and been banned in several of them. South Park is not for everyone. It was never designed to be for everyone. It was designed to be honest. And honesty, as Parker and Stone have demonstrated repeatedly over the past 28 years, is the most offensive thing of all. Now let's bring this to a close. The episodes we've covered tonight represent the extremes of what South Park has been willing to do. Scott Tenorman Must Die showed that the show could depict acts of genuine, premeditated evil committed by a child and play it as comedy. An 8-year-old boy manipulated the adults around him, engineered the death of 2 people, cooked their bodies into food, and served it to their son while singing a mocking song over his tears. And the episode never punished him for it. That lack of consequences was the point. The world isn't fair. The bad guys sometimes win. And the scariest villains aren't the ones who act out of anger. They're the ones who plan everything in advance and smile while they do it. It Hits the Fan proved that a single word, repeated enough times, loses all meaning, and that the rules society creates around language are often more absurd than the language itself. Comedy Central expected outrage. They got indifference. The word that was supposed to be too shocking for television turned out to be boring when you heard it 162 times. The episode's thesis was confirmed by its own reception. Nobody cared. The power of profanity evaporated the moment it was given unlimited airtime, which is exactly what the episode predicted would happen. Trapped in the Closet demonstrated that even the most powerful organizations in the world couldn't silence a cartoon, even when they tried everything from legal threats to corporate pressure to allegedly forcing a legendary musician out of his own career. The Church of Scientology spent decades building a reputation as an organization that could destroy its critics through litigation and intimidation. South Park exposed their beliefs on national television, lost a beloved cast member in the process, and kept going without hesitation. The episode earned an Emmy nomination. The church earned nothing. The Isaac Hayes story within that saga is the part that still hurts the most. A man who loved his job, who loved the people he worked with, who had been a part of something culturally significant for nearly a decade, was stripped of all of it by the people around him while he was physically unable to speak for himself. His son has spent years making sure the world knows the truth. Isaac Hayes didn't leave South Park. South Park was taken from him. And the only people who benefited from that theft were the leaders of an organization that couldn't handle being laughed at. Episodes 200 and 201 exposed the darkest truth of all, that the only reliable way to censor someone in a free society is to threaten to kill them. And that sometimes, tragically, that threat works. Parker and Stone wrote an episode arguing that censorship through violence is the only truly effective form of censorship. And then their own network proved them right by censoring that exact argument because of threats of violence. The episode was designed to be a commentary on fear. It became the evidence for its own thesis. The irony is so perfect that if Parker and Stone had invented it, nobody would believe it was real. But it was real. The NYPD deployed additional officers, the FBI investigated. And Comedy Central bleated over 2 minutes of dialogue because they were afraid of what might happen if they let the audience hear it. The fact that the uncensored version was sitting on a public web server for 4 years, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to download it, feels almost like Parker and Stone's final joke on the entire situation. The speech was never deleted, it was just made invisible. And all it took to find it was one person who knew where to look. That's a metaphor for censorship itself. You can bleep something, you can black it out, you can pull it from streaming services, but you can't destroy it. The idea still exists. The words were still spoken, someone recorded them, and eventually they surface. The truth always surfaces. It just sometimes takes 4 years and a guy on 4chan with the right software. Woodland Critter Christmas showed that you can make anything palatable if you present it in the right package, that cute animals and rhyming narration can disguise Satanism, human sacrifice, and the birth of the Antichrist as holiday entertainment. The episode works because it exploits our conditioning. We've been trained since childhood to trust certain visual and auditory cues. Cute animals mean safety. Rhyming narration means bedtime stories. Christmas music means warmth and family. Woodland Critter. Christmas weaponizes all of those associations and turns them against the viewer. By the time you realize what's happening, a rabbit has already been sacrificed and the blood orgy is in full swing. And you're still hearing Dr. Seuss rhymes. The episode also functions as a commentary on Cartman himself. The entire story is revealed to be something Cartman wrote. It's his creative vision, the violence, the blasphemy, the anti-Semitism directed at Kyle, the meaningless death at the end. All of it came from the mind of a 9-year-old sociopath, which raises an uncomfortable question. If Cartman can produce something this disturbing from his imagination alone, what does that say about the real-world creators of violent, offensive entertainment? Are Parker and Stone acknowledging that they, like Cartman, create offensive content because it gives them power over their audience? Or are they arguing that the content itself is harmless and the problem lies only with people who take it too seriously? The episode never answers this question, it just presents it. And then it kills Kyle with AIDS, and Banned in China prove that in the age of global capitalism, a 22-minute cartoon can still threaten a superpower badly enough to earn a nationwide ban. China's response was the most extreme reaction South Park has ever provoked. Not a letter-writing campaign, not a lawsuit, not a pulled rerun, a total erasure. Every trace of the show scrubbed from a digital ecosystem serving 1 billion people. And Parker and Stone's response was a fake apology so perfectly constructed that it became more famous than the episode that inspired it. They turned their own banning into content. They turned censorship into comedy. They made the Chinese government's power look small by refusing to take it seriously. Each of these episodes caused something to happen in the real world. Real organizations responded. Real governments took action. Real people lost jobs, faced threats, or had their lives changed. A musician named Isaac Hayes lost the last years of his career and possibly his life because an organization he belonged to couldn't handle being mocked. A man named Zachary Adam Chesser went to prison for 25 years after his threats against the show's creators set off a chain of events that ended with him attempting to join a terrorist organization. An entire country with 1.4 billion people decided that a construction paper cartoon was too dangerous to exist within its borders. And through it all, South Park kept going. The show premiered on August 13th, 1997. That first episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, drew a 1.3 Nielsen rating, roughly 1 million viewers. By the 10th episode, the rating had skyrocketed to 6.4. At its peak in the late 1990s, South Park held the highest ratings of any basic cable program. The all-time most watched episode, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, drew approximately 6.2 million viewers with an 8.2 Nielsen rating, setting a record for non-sports basic cable. In 2025, the show was still drawing massive audiences. Season 27's second episode attracted approximately 6.2 million cross-platform viewers in its first 3 days, the most watched episode since 2018. After nearly 30 years, South Park is still one of the most watched animated programs on television. Trey Parker and Matt Stone were in their mid-20s when they created South Park. They're now in their mid-50s. They've spent more of their adult lives making this show than not making it. And they've spent those decades repeatedly proving a single thesis that has never changed. No topic is too sacred for comedy. No institution is too powerful to mock. No threat is frightening enough to justify silence. Some people think that's irresponsible. Some people think that's brave. Parker and Stone don't seem particularly interested in which label people choose. They just keep making their show, 6 days at a time, one episode after another, season after season, pushing every boundary they can find and looking for new ones when the old ones break. The episodes we covered tonight are the ones where the boundaries pushed back, where the real world showed up and said, no, you've gone too far. And every single time, Parker and Stone's response was the same. They didn't apologize. They didn't back down. They made another episode. That's the story of South Park's most offensive episodes. A show about 4 kids in a small Colorado mountain town that somehow managed to start wars with Scientology, provoke death threats from radical organizations, get banned by the Chinese government, break every profanity record in television history, and feed a teenager his own parents in a bowl of chili. All while being animated with construction paper cutouts, and voiced primarily by 2 guys doing funny voices in a recording booth. The show started as a crude experiment. It evolved into a cultural institution. In 1997, when it premiered, nobody expected it to last more than a season or 2. The animation looked terrible on purpose. The humor was juvenile and shocking. The characters were children who swore constantly and witnessed horrific things on a weekly basis. Critics called it the end of civilization. Parents' groups demanded it be taken off the air. Mainstream media treated it as a sign of cultural decay. 28 years later, the show has outlasted almost every critic who condemned it. The Parents Television Council still exists, but their campaigns against South Park have long since stopped generating media attention. The Catholic League still objects to specific episodes, but Comedy Central stopped paying attention to their letters decades ago. The Church of Scientology still exists, but its public reputation has been permanently damaged by the very exposure that South Park helped initiate. Tom Cruise still makes movies, but his closet scene in Trapped in the Closet has become the defining cultural image of his relationship with the church. The Chinese government still maintains its ban, but the ban itself became a badge of honor for the show rather than a punishment. Parker and Stone have outlasted everyone who tried to stop them, not through stubbornness alone, though there's plenty of that, but through consistency. They've applied the same standard to every target. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Scientologists, Mormons, Hindus, atheists, liberals, conservatives, libertarians, socialists, Americans, Canadians, Chinese, Afghans, white people, black people, gay people, straight people, trans people, children, adults, the elderly, the disabled. Nobody has ever received special treatment from South Park. And that universal application of mockery is what makes the show defensible, even when individual episodes are indefensible by any conventional standard. The show works because it's honest about what it is. It's not pretending to be educational. It's not pretending to be responsible. It's not pretending to be a positive influence on children. It's a show that says the things people think but are afraid to say. Sometimes those things are profound, sometimes they're stupid, sometimes they're both at the same time. And the audience keeps coming back because they know that whatever South Park says, it was said without fear. That fearlessness is the show's true legacy. Not the profanity, not the violence, not the bans or the death threats or the international incidents. The legacy is that two guys from Colorado proved that you can make fun of anything, anyone, anywhere for nearly 30 years and survive. Not just survive, thrive, win Emmys, win a Peabody, get nominated for an Oscar, sign billion-dollar deals, and never, not once, apologize for real. Nearly 3 decades, over 300 episodes, 5 Emmys, 1 Peabody, 1 Oscar nomination, multiple countries where the show is illegal to watch, and no sign of stopping. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. We cover deep dives like this regularly, breaking down the stories behind the stories, the controversies behind the controversies, and the history that gets forgotten when the outrage cycle moves on to the next thing. There's a lot more to explore in the world of South Park and in the broader world of entertainment censorship, creative freedom, and the line between comedy and consequence. If any of that interests you, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and good